And we are following breaking news in the NFL. The Chicago Bears know their next GM. They are finalizing a deal to hire Chiefs executive Ryan Poles as their next general manager. Our NFL insider Jonathan Jones confirming to us. Ryan Poles, he's just 36 years old. He's worked for the Chiefs for almost 13 years. He worked his way up in that organization over the past 13 years. He was the Chiefs director of scouting when the Chiefs moved up in the draft to take Patrick Mahomes. He was eventually promoted to executive director of player personnel last summer. Ryan Poles will replace Ryan Pace, who was fired last month after 7 seasons in Chicago. So let's welcome in NFL insider Jonathan Jones to talk about this. What do we need to know about Ryan Poles to become the next Bears GM?
Yeah, it's really not at all a surprise to me that Ryan Poles finally gets a general manager role. This is a guy who, when I did my survey around the league, he was a name that kept coming up and kept coming up, right behind Joe Schoen, who, of course, was just hired as the Giants general manager. What we know about Ryan Poles, of course, he has been there with the Kansas City Chiefs through this sort of renaissance, dynastic run, if you will, being a key contributor there to Brett Veach's staff in the front office. Before that, of course, he learned under Dorsey there, has learned with Andy Reid, has learned with Scott Pioli, a former Boston College offensive lineman. Ryan Poles is, and so not at all a surprise that in this hiring cycle, Ryan Poles is scooped up and he heads to the NFC North with the Chicago Bears.
You know, according to reports I was reading, he was in the final round of interviews with the Giants. He was actually scheduled to meet with the Vikings tomorrow for a second time, but he wanted to go to Chicago first. I mean, this was a guy who was a hot commodity for several of these positions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it speaks to his acumen. I think it speaks to, you know, how he can scout, how he is really a fantastic all-around candidate. And Amanda, every single time a new general manager gets hired, I have to be quick to say, listen, there's no real rubric for how to predict how well these GMs are going to do. But when you look at how instrumental he has been in this Chiefs run, when you look at his background as a former player and how he has scouted and how the Chiefs have structured contracts and how he's been around all the parts and pieces of a winning organization. Of course, the winningest franchise in NFL regular season history, the Chicago Bears, would want to take a shot at him. And yeah, the New York Giants were involved with him, even though Joe Schoen was always sort of the favorite there. The Minnesota Vikings had Ryan Poles as a top 2 finalist, along with Browns executive Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. So now one may say, well, it's Adofo-Mensah's by default. And I would just say that ever since the weekend, I have been hearing that actually it was Kwesi and not Ryan Poles that would ultimately be the general manager in Minnesota. So whether he gets it by default or not there in Minnesota, he ultimately is going to become the general manager. But that's just one note. And then finally, the last note, Amanda, there's a video circulating. George McCaskey, the team owner, picking up Ryan Poles at the airport. It is very, very unique. You know, normally you send some intern, some grunt over to pick up the guy being flown in. But apparently, and I can't confirm it was McCaskey, but it sure looked a lot like McCaskey. And so that could have been a pretty good indicator. But I got a text late last night saying hearing it could be Poles as early as tomorrow morning. Of course, now we're talking today, Tuesday. And here it is, Ryan Poles in Chicago.
Yeah, apparently he was trying to be not incognito at all, wearing a Bears jacket and a Bears face mask as well when picking up Ryan Poles from the airport there. Of course, everybody wants to know, okay, you got your GM. Now what does this mean for the head coaching position? Of course, he's coming from the Chiefs. Eric Bieniemy's name has been thrown around for several of these head coach openings there, but we know the Bears have been talking to several people. What can you tell us about what this GM hiring means when it comes to a head coach?
I would not at all be surprised to see a veteran head coach come out Chicago's way. There are reports that Jim Caldwell is in the building or will soon be in the building. I think that's a possibility. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a probability. I know there was a lot of anticipation around that building for Leslie Frazier, who interviewed there, played there, was on the '85 Bears. Now, of course, with the Bills losing, he's free for a second interview. Eric Bieniemy, he had one interview with the Denver Broncos, was not chosen as a finalist there. Is it possible that the Chicago Bears extend an interview to Bieniemy now that Ryan Poles is there? Sure. But then again, they did just come off Matt Nagy, formerly the offensive coordinator of the Kansas City Chiefs, and maybe there's a little residual and scar tissue there, fair or unfair. So something to keep an eye on. But normally when you hire a first-time general manager, more times than not, teams like to pair that first-time GM, that young GM, with a veteran head coach. I wouldn't at all be surprised if Chicago goes the route, especially, of course, coming off the Matt Nagy era where a first-time head coach and didn't get the success they wanted. So don't at all be surprised when you look at the list of guys if it winds up being someone who has taken a trip or two somewhere else in his past.
JJ, you said early on that this GM position, this head coaching position, was very attractive when it came to the openings being there in Chicago. So let's talk about what it's going to take. Ryan Poles now in a new job to turn this team around, turn this franchise around. What are some of the moves that he needs to start making here?
Well, he has to figure out the wide receiver position. I don't think there's any doubt about that, and what they're going to do with Allen Robinson. They tried to piece together this offensive line. Remember, they brought on Jason Peters right before the start of the season. That offensive line is going to need some help. The defensive backfield, on paper, is really good. They underachieved this season, and I think everyone back there to a man would admit that. They got fantastic pass rush, so you feel good about that. The unfortunate part for the Chicago Bears, of course, is they don't have a first-round draft pick. What is the fortunate part is they don't have a first-round draft pick because they have their quarterback of the future in Justin Fields, of course, trading that first to the New York Giants in order to move up and secure Justin Fields. So why is this job so attractive? Well, first of all, you have a quarterback who is very skilled, who is on his rookie contract. So you can obviously build around him. You're not devoting 10, 15% of your salary cap to that position. But also, you believe in Justin Fields if you're Ryan Poles or anyone taking this job. And hey, with just a little coaching, with just a couple of tweaks here and there, he can really be that dude here in year 2 going into that. So that makes you feel really good that his numbers are going to improve, that you are going to see that steady incline. So, and then finally, why is this job so attractive? Well, it's because it's a legacy position. I talked about how the Chicago Bears have more regular season wins than any other franchise in NFL history. You win there, you get steakhouses named after you. You become a king there. And so that is a huge, huge draw, has been a huge draw for any number of GM candidates. Now, of course, Ryan Poles in that position, and plenty of head coaches and head coach hopefuls who would very much want to be with the Chicago Bears.
JJ, really quickly, give me a grade for this.
Oh, I think it's an A. You know, again, I have no idea what it ultimately is going to be. No one can say because no one really knows what early on makes a great general manager 5 years down the road. But in terms of who are the top 2 hires that any team could have gone out there to make, it was Joe Schoen in New York. It was Ryan Poles with the Chicago Bears. And here they are.
Jonathan Jones, we appreciate it. We appreciate your insight, giving us the heads up on this, and then being able to confirm the news there. The Bears set to hire Ryan Poles as their new GM, just 36 years old. JJ, we'll talk to you very soon. In the meantime, it is Tuesday. That means it is time for a new episode of Inside the NFL. This new episode's hitting Tuesdays at 9:30. You can start streaming it there exclusively on Paramount+.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.